Set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames. It's from a poem by the Sufi mystic Rumi, who wrote that very long time ago. And in a conversation that I had earlier this week with a person, that particular poem and that particular line, or those lines, came up in our conversation. And what I wanted to share this morning, there are some people that a couple of ideas that I want to share might challenge a few folks, but I wanted to do it, I have to do it anyway. Yesterday, I had two experiences that really related to the idea, or I'm using to bring us into the idea of set your life on fire. I attended a funeral on yesterday. And at the funeral, a lot of the things that were said from people who were commenting, from the eulogists, and all of the things there were all about warning people about getting their life right. Get your life right. You don't want to run out of time. And the big motivating thing that was talked about by a lot of the people that were there was doing what you can to avoid going to hell. And it was talked about over and over and over again. I don't want to go to hell. You don't want to go to hell. Get right. You better get right. Time's running out. You never know. You don't want to go to hell. And all of those things that were constantly shared in the day at the funeral. And then later that evening, Em and I were sitting and we were watching Netflix, and the movie Come Sunday came on. And those of you that may not be familiar with that particular film, it's about Bishop Carlton Pearson, who was a Pentecostal superstar, if you will. Carlton Pearson, he made his rise being partnered with Oral Roberts there at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa. He was a regular person on the Christian television. He was a singer, a preacher, a pastor. He was really on the rise. He was really out there. He was really going. And he was well respected by many people, admired. He had a huge ministry. He had a congregation that was a diverse congregation there in Tulsa, and they told him that would never happen. All of the things that he was doing. And then Carlton Pearson began to wrestle with something, because one night he was watching television and he saw them highlighting people over in Africa, in one of the countries, I believe it was Rwanda, that were starving. And he talked about the idea that started to come to him is that as a part of his training, as a part of his teaching, these people that were suffering, that were starving, that were a part of a war-torn country were going to hell because they had not been evangelized and converted. And so even though they didn't know anything about that, his particular philosophy and doctrine is that they were condemned to a life of hell and damnation. And he wrestled with that, and he started to pray, and he felt like that ultimately he heard the idea is that these people can't help themselves. There's no way they could go to hell. And he started to share that idea. And of course you can imagine being Pentecostal and being in that circle. It didn't go over too well. As a matter of fact, people started calling him a heretic. They started to leave his church in droves. The association that he was a part of banished him. Even Oral Roberts himself had issues with that, and finally they had their strained relationship. But Carlton Pearson persevered, and the idea was that for his perspective, that everyone already, that there was no hell, and people were not condemned. And people said, how can you say these things? But Carlton Pearson persevered, and to this day, he has his own ministry. He's done things with the New Thought community, and he's called himself now a Metacostal, which is the blending of Pentecostalism and metaphysics. But that's something that he did. And as I watched his story, and his story is very much like mine in many ways, of leaving the traditional way of looking at things and moving into new thought, ancient wisdom. But as I looked at that story, and I thought earlier to my experience at the funeral, what was a lot of people's motivating factor was not to live life in such a way that was fulfilling and enriching and all of that, but it was rather living a life to avoid hell. That the things that they talked about at the funeral, the things that people should do, it was all out of a fear or all out of concern that ultimately people would live a life condemned to eternity in hell. And even there, when Carlton Pearson had his conversation with Oral Roberts, and he said, well, are those people who are over there that we've not had a chance to reach anything, are they condemned to hell? And everybody's answer back to them was clear, yes, they are. Even if they can't help themselves, the answer was, yes, they are. And the motivation to try and save them so they weren't condemned to that. And I just kept thinking and wrestling with all night the idea that for so many people, the motivation for life is not to live life on its own terms, but to live life so that one doesn't ultimately spend an afterlife condemned. And I thought about the fact of my own journey, and the journey that I'm sure some of you maybe have taken too. You wouldn't be here. But the idea that rather than life being about avoiding things, that life is about choosing things. It's about choosing to live in such a way that our lives are rich. Choosing to live in such a way that we understand that rather than trying to avoid something, that we live in such a way that we welcome things in. You know that we teach that what we resist persists. And when we start talking about trying to avoid hell, what can happen so often is we begin living, as I would say, hellish lives. Because if we start to think that certain people are condemned and certain people are okay, then what happens is we draw that line of demarcation and we condemn certain people and we exclude certain groups of people, and we say that certain groups of people are not welcome because for whatever reason they are going there, and unless they turn things around. And when we do that, we create here and now in this place, if you will, a hellish existence. And what do I mean by a hellish existence? What I mean by that is where we judge people rather than love people unconditionally, where we condemn people rather than opening our arms to accept, where we have a closed mind rather than a mind that is open and available to the expression of spirit. And when I see the theme of the month and what Rumi was trying to say in those few lines that I picked out, set your life on fire. Set your life on fire. And as I listen to those words resonate in my mind and within me, it said to me that what Rumi was saying is that when we learn how to live life from a passion, whatever your passion might be, each and every one of you, your passion is different. But the thing of it is that you are here, brought here in this time-space reality with a passion, with certain gifts, with things that you are endowed with. And the admonition that we have from Rumi is to set your life on fire. And when I put together the affirmation for the month, one of the things that came to me, that if I'm going to set my life on fire, there has to be a source that allows me to become, and I may be not saying this in the right way, but to become inflamed or a flame or whatever it is that it might be. But there has to be something that is there that causes me to start to burn, and not burn up, but to burn. And as I started to think about that, I thought about the fact that deep within us is a divine fire, a divine spark that is eternally burning. It is that which is in us that causes us, in the midst of things, and sometimes even in spite of things, to keep on keeping on. And when I allow myself, and when you allow yourself to become ignited by that eternal, internal flame, you set your life on fire. We have a choice. Every day we are confronted with a choice. So when we wake up in the morning, and tomorrow is Monday, and a lot of people have problems with Monday because they maybe go to places where they don't necessarily enjoy working, or they have instances where they don't enjoy facing Monday. And we have a choice where we can say, oh, it's Monday. Or we can say, oh, it's Monday. We can say, I got to get up and go here, I got to get up and go there. Or we can change it to, I have the opportunity to get up and to go and to do and to be. We can choose how we view things. We can choose how we see life. One of the stories that I love, probably because being an anthropologist, it was about an anthropologist and his wife. They were newly married, and they went off and to study a group of First Nation people or indigenous people or Native Americans, however it is we wish to choose them, and all of that, and how when the woman got there, she was miserable because her husband was off into his pursuit. He was doing the things that he needed to do and learning the language and all of that, but the wife just really kind of kept to herself. She said, well, I didn't really think I was signing on for all this. It was muddy a lot, it was raining, people weren't necessarily friendly to her, all kinds of things were going wrong on her behalf. And so she kept on having a pity party, thinking, why did I get involved in this? Why did I have this happen to me? And my husband doesn't care enough about me, because if he did, he wouldn't keep me in this God-forsaken place. And she just went on and on and on. So she wrote a letter to her mother and said, I know my mother would give me, permission to come back home. And so she sent the letter off, and a few weeks passed. She got a response back from her mother. She excitedly opened the envelope thinking her mother's going to say, come home, there's no way you should be in that. But it was just a few lines. The letter, the response from her mother said, 2 men were in prison, and they looked through the window. One man saw bars, and the other saw stars. She took the letter, she followed it up, threw it down. That's not going to help me. What's that supposed to mean? A little bit later, she contemplated on things. She picked up the letter, she unwalled it, she looked at it again, and she started to contemplate and started to think about it. And she started to get it. So what she did was, rather than staying confined in the quarters that she and her husband had, she ventured out a little bit. She made some overtures to some of the women that were in the village. They first were surprised that she, after all this time, would withdraw themselves from her, that they would come out. But they started to do some things, and they started to communicate. And as they started to communicate, she started to pick up words. And as they started to pick up words, she looked at some of the things that they were doing, the crafts they were creating, the blankets, and some of the other things that she became interested in those things. And they showed her how they did things, and she started to work creating some of the same blankets and baskets and other things that they were doing. And after a while, she became so immersed in that lifestyle with them, that while her husband was doing his pursuit, she began writing her own book about the things that it was that they did. And she looked back on the fact that what her mother was telling her is that in circumstances, you have a choice. You can, and as Judy reminded us so beautifully today, you can look right at immediate circumstances, and that can be all that you see, and you miss things that are there. Or you can look beyond and see greater. And when she stopped feeling that she was compelled to do this or to do that, or living in fear, or living in a way of not having a choice, she was miserable. But when she understood that she had a choice, and she could see beyond that circumstance, and her life started to change, and she was able to set her life on fire, if you will, to find her own passion, her own way of seeing and understanding the world. And ultimately, she created something that became just as well known as her husband's work. Because of all of that, in each of you, I don't know what your passion is. Some of you may be living it now. Some of you may be figuring it out. Some of you may say, it's past time for my passion, and I say, no, it's not. Whatever it might be, just know this. You have within you that internal, eternal flame that is waiting for you to say, I'm open and available. I allow myself to light up, set my life on fire. I allow myself to be in a place where I begin to understand this flame, this eternal flame that has been burning always and keeps on burning, that is beyond condition, beyond conditions, that is beyond being concerned about wherever it is we're going and all of that, because we know that ultimately we are a part of a loving universe that doesn't condemn anyone, but that loves us, that continues to provide for us, continues to give us infinite possibilities. And when we set our life on fire, we can see that. And the other part of that, I'm not going to touch today, other than to say, to vibe, where Rumi says to seek those who fan the flames, and I put it another way in the affirmation, to vibe with your tribe. Because see, we can spend a whole lot of time out there trying to get other people's approval. And the very people that we sometimes take for granted are our biggest cheerleaders, our biggest partners in believing, our biggest people who hold space for us when we're trying to still get it together. So, set your life on fire and seek those that fan your flames. This is heaven on earth, right here, right now, the opportunity for each of us to live from this space. And so it is. So it is.
invite you to take a breath, releasing this breath, knowing that there is only one presence and one power in the universe, and that is God. And as each of us embodies all that we have learned today, we take it in, we make it our own, and we simply live from those very truths. We give thanks for all that have participated today. We give thanks for the message, the centering moment, the affirmative reading, the beautiful music, and just the beautiful energy that each and every person has brought into this space and into this place today. Moving forward, knowing that I get to choose. When I look out the window, I can see stars or I can see bars. I can choose to let myself be imprisoned in a place where everything is just tight and nothing's going right. Or I can see beyond all of the circumstances and choose to walk among the stars. I get to choose because there is something within me that's been there before the beginning, that divine flame. And I choose to allow that flame to light me up. I'm on fire. I'm living my passion. I'm going to be me. So I release, I let go, and I let God. And so